What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? John out here with you. It is December 18th, 2021. How is everybody doing out there today? I know we still don't have baseball with the lockout, but there is some news that I wanted to share across, and there were some rumors that were circulating around Carlos Correa. And ultimately, throughout this broadcast and this time, I want to tell you why I think it's a good thing that he didn't end up in Detroit. But we're going to need to take a couple of routes to get to there, and then you can let me know what you think. Facebook.com/ToBeAGunslinger, Twitter @JohnReinott. So it's official. The Javier Baez move is 6 years, $140 million. But the best part of it is if it doesn't work out and it completely blows up in the face, there's an opt-out in 2 years in 2023. Or that means that Baez could be making even more money with the Tigers if it works out on both sides. So Carlos Correa is not going to be joining the Tigers. It turns out that Carlos Correa wants a deal that's similar to what Corey Seager just received with the Texas Rangers, north of 10 years and $325 million. North of 10 and 325. Let's see how that ends up working out. We'll talk about that with some moves going forward, but first I want to give you a quote from Tigers owner Chris Ilitch. So he said, I would defer to Al Avila in terms of what he and AJ Hinch believe our organization needs to accomplish our goals and execute our plan. The resources are going to be there. I know Al, AJ, and myself are all very aligned in making sure that when we talk about new contracts through free agency, we're mindful that our goal is not to be good at one time, but good over the course of time. And this isn't something that we've heard previously from the Ilitches and things like that, because when Mike Ilitch was still around, the father figure and all of that, Little Caesars Pizza, the business owner and all of that, he loved the Detroit Tigers, even more so than the Red Wings. He wanted them to win so badly. And he would make ultimately a bunch of moves that would turn out to be, flashy and splashy at the time, but it didn't get the Tigers to their goal, although they were usually pretty competitive in recent years, but they never really got to their ultimate goal. So this is from all of us, and this is probably what you're thinking right now. Do you think this Javier Baez move was a good move, or do you ultimately feel because the Tigers couldn't land Correa that they cheaped out? So this is from a few years ago, but I did want to share this. This is a fan-cited blog article from Andy Patton in 2018. And a couple of these are going to profile some of the things I want to talk about today, some of these moves that didn't work out. So this was the Juan Gonzalez deal. This is when the Tigers sent Francisco Cordero, Frank Catalanato, Alan Webb, Gabe Kapler, Bill Hasselman, Justin Thompson to the Rangers for Juan Gonzalez, Danny Patterson, and Greg Zaun. So this is his words. I'm going to read this to you a little bit and then we can discuss. So the Detroit Tigers no doubt wanted to open Comerica Park in 2000 with a bang, adding a superstar in their prime, Juan Gonzalez. He seemed like the perfect solution, but they gave up a pretty penny to acquire Juan Gon, giving up 6 players in exchange for Gonzalez and a pair of veterans in Patterson and Zaun. This deal, as you likely already know, was a disaster. Gonzalez never settled into Detroit. He was unsettled by the spacious confines of the new park, hitting just 22 home runs and had 67 RBI. He had 289 and 116 OPS in the lone season in Detroit, signing with the Indians during the offseason, which are now the Guardians. There's no doubt that this was a trade that decimated the franchise. Having players like Catalanato, Cordero, and Kapler would have likely prevented the Tigers from being the worst team in AL in baseball history for a long time, as it stands. So Gonzalez's war with the Tigers wasn't even the best the Tigers acquired. His journeyman Danny Patterson posted a 2.4 in 5 years out of Detroit's bullpen. Zaun was sent to Kansas City before ever playing a game in Detroit. All in all, it's fair to call this one of the worst trades in Tigers history. Cordero went on to save 329 games and make 3 All-Star teams. Catalanato played 10 more seasons, hitting 293, slugging 109. Kapler also played 10 more years, hitting 272 with 64 home runs and 64 steals. All 3 of them were very useful, above-average big leaguers. Meanwhile, the Tigers got a down year from an aging slugger and 5 average seasons from a journeyman reliever. So that didn't work out in terms of Juan Gonzalez and all that, as you know, before you going into Comerica Park. He was a damn good player in Texas, and he ended up doing a little bit better in Cleveland, but he didn't work out in Detroit. There was a divorce settlement and all that stuff going on there too. And yeah, it's kind of funny because we're going to be talking about a future divorce settlement and all that stuff as well. but it didn't really work out too well for the Tigers. But let's add another one here. In more recent history, the Jordan Zimmerman 5-year, $110 million deal. So he had his, let's see, 4 seasons in Detroit. He combined a 25-41 record. In 2016, an ERA of 4.87. The interesting note, his first year, 2016 with the Tigers, he had a 4-0 record in April with an ERA under 1. You're thinking, damn, this is a good signing for the Tigers. But it didn't end up working out that way. Ended up with a 4.87 ERA. In 2017, ERA of 6.08, 2018, 4.52, 2019, 6.91. In 2019, he had 23 starts and a 1.13 record. So Jordan Zimmerman was an ultimate gas can. And we're not going to sit here and talk about Jared Washburn or some of the other moves in the meantime that didn't work out for the Tigers, but just some of the main ones. So Juan Gonzalez and Jordan Zimmerman, that didn't work out too well. Now here's an interesting one. This only worked out for a couple years, but it didn't ultimately fulfill that whole contract that went across multiple teams. Prince Fielder, 9 years, $214 million. He finally got his last $24 million installment in 2020, just last year. So let's talk about this. To the 2 years that the Tigers and Prince Fielder, he was here, to his credit, he was incredibly productive in Detroit, in my opinion. He had 356 hits, 55 home runs, 214 RBI, a combined 108 and 106 in the 2012 and 2013 seasons. So I thought he was very good. 160 walks and 199 strikeouts. So what ended up happening was after those 2 years, he ended up getting some of those injuries and he got moved on to the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers picked up some of that contract, and some of that insurance policy was shared in between Detroit and Texas for Fielder's injured neck and all of that. But I guess we can also thank Dave Dombrowski, Prince Fielder, the Texas Rangers, and all of them trading for Ian Kinsler, because the double play combination with Jose Iglesias for a while was quite fun to watch. Possibly the best double play combination since Alan Trammell and Lou Whitaker. And that pretty much has been the bane of the existence after that. So here's one other thing that didn't work out too well. So with Brad Ausmus, with the exception of 2014, the Tigers manager, he was 90-72. There weren't really any dominant teams in that year of 2014, but the Tigers made the postseason in the first year with Brad Ausmus, with Jim Leyland's players and a lot of the leftovers there from the 2012 World Series. But he did make the postseason, but he got swept 0-3 to the Royals because you got Jabba Chamberlain and all that, who was a gas can and pretty much blew it all up. So, as I mentioned, the Tigers made the World Series in 2006 and 2012. Ausmus at one time had a prime Miguel Cabrera and at least a really, really good Prince Fielder, if you don't want to say prime, because probably his best years were with the Milwaukee Brewers. But consistently, the guy played in both years while he was here 162 games and routinely 162 or 140 games with the Milwaukee Brewers. So he had Cabrera, he had Fielder, and as well at one time, he had Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, and David Price, all 3 back-to-back Cy Young Award winners in a row, all starting in a playoff series, and you couldn't win a game. So following years for Brad Ausmus, 2015, 74 and 87, 2016 a little better, 86 and 75, but not good enough to make the playoffs. 2017, a complete fall off, 64 and 98. So here's the interesting question. During this time, when the Tigers selected Brad Ausmus, Ron Gardenhire had a brief retirement from the Minnesota Twins before joining the Tigers. So who's to say whether or not Ron Gardenhire just wanted that little layoff, or if he would have came back to join the Tigers if they would have offered him some money. I do think Ron Gardenhire would have been a better choice instead of Brad Ausmus, coming directly from Jim Leyland in 2013, going into the 2014 season. So he never really had a good chance, Ron Gardenhire, in terms of having a good Tigers team. He never got that opportunity. He was above 500 in Minnesota in 8 winning seasons in 2022 to 2012. It means my fault. 2002 to 2010, with the exception of 2007. So except for 2007, between 02 and 10, he had all above 500 seasons except for 07. He had 6 playoff appearances. And I know, granted, during that time, during those playoff appearances, It always seemed like Gardenhire would match up against the New York Yankees and Derek Jeter, Alex Rodriguez, and all of that, and ultimately fall flat. But at the same time, the Minnesota Twins were always a competitive regular season team, but they didn't always have a lot of talent around them. Yes, everybody knows about Torrey Hunter, and Joe Mauer didn't last for the longest time, but Joe Mauer was an incredible catcher, but then he had to really play first base because he couldn't really catch anymore. So they had some players. Justin Morneau was an MVP. Joe Nathan was excellent out of the bullpen, especially before he came to the Tigers. Joe Nathan was excellent in Minnesota, but in terms of those names that I mentioned, those four names, that entire talent around them on that team was never really that good. So it seems like Ron always had the exception of having some great players, but never having a whole good team around him. And then when he did get back into managing between the 3 years in 2018, 19, and 20 for the Tigers, that was a completely gutted Tigers team. So he never really got the opportunity to have a really good Tigers team that Brad Ausmus had. So in my point of all of that, talk about all the things that didn't work, between Juan Gonzalez, between Jordan Zimmerman, between some of the things with Prince Fielder where he ultimately didn't fulfill that entire contract, although had a couple good years. There was a Jared Washburn in between, and some of these middle things, bringing in Sean Casey, all of that. Some of those things didn't work at that time, between 06 and on. Even when the Tigers made the World Series with the rookie Justin Verlander in 2006, and you thought that all of that could be good. You can argue at that time, especially going between the 06 and 2012 World Series teams. I like Rick Porcello. He was developed here pretty well, I thought. But people might argue with me that the only developed talent that the Tigers had from their draft was Justin Verlander. That panned out to be a Hall of Famer and all of that. Although Rick Porcello did win a Cy Young, and he consistently won double-digit games in a Tigers uniform. So I would say that. But the Tigers, you can argue, they didn't have a lot of draftable, fulfilled talent. A lot of their stuff was acquired by Dave Dombrowski, trading for Carlos Guillen, trading for Jose Iglesias, acquiring Johnny Peralta, trading for Prince Fielder. There's a lot of things, in the off season. There's a lot of things that the Tigers have done going forward, especially in the last few years, that have put themselves beyond the 8 ball. And that was because of all those things that they've tried to acquire. Yes, Dave Dombrowski got us to a couple of World Series in 06 and 2012. But what happened after that was the Tigers completely fell apart, as we talk about between 18, 19, and 20. So here's my point. When you think about Carlos Correa, and you think about what's been happening with A.J. Hinch. A.J. Hinch, as I've talked about, is one of those guys that maybe at the beginning with the scandal with the Houston Astros and all of that, I'd said, I don't know if I want this here in Detroit because I don't want everything else being repeated. But I had to sit on the soapbox, talk about that, and then completely admit to you that I was wrong, and this guy is still one of the top 3 managers, if not one of the best managers in the league, bar none right now, and he's on his final year of the deal. But A.J. Hinch has been nothing more of a godsend because you think about the last couple of years since he's been here, especially last year, completely overachieved, just like 12 games below 500, but winning both series against the Houston Astros, winning some big games with a team that really doesn't have any talent on it, and a Miguel Cabrera that's out the door at least in 2023 or 2024. There's not been much for him to do. So thinking about it like this, when you're talking about Javier Baez and you're talking about Carlos Correa, you have a Javier Baez who's 6 years and 140. Again, the opt-out maybe in 2023 if things completely fall apart. But this is one of those instances when you're talking about Zach Short and Nico Goodrum at that shortstop position that you didn't get any production there. You're bringing in someone, yes, he might strike out a little bit too much. Unless you want to go halfway between the 2020 season and talk about his numbers with the New York Mets when the guy played as a low-key superstar, honestly. His defense was always been top-notch, but his offensive numbers were great as he struck out less. He hit some home runs, hits for doubles, he got some steals. He played really, really great. So if the Tigers can find a way to unlock some of the stuff that he did with the Mets going into this 2021 season, honestly, I believe this 6-year, 140 deal is going to be a little bit of a steal for the Detroit Tigers. And look, I know it's a lot of money in terms of baseball and compared to hockey and some of these other sports like that. But you do know you're getting one thing for Javier Baez, who's been 28, 29 years old going into the season. You're going to get superstar level defense at a position that ultimately needs to be improved. And look, if you have Javier Baez already cemented in there, what does that do with Jonathan Schoop? That puts him back at the second base position, which leaves Candelario at third. So when you have Baez and Schoop in that middle infield, you're going to be turning some incredible double plays, and you're going to get solid defense down the middle. So that's already cemented, even before talking about some of the things that he can do on offense. I believe he's going to do a little bit better. I believe he's going to cut down a little bit on those strikeouts. He's still going to continue to hit for a little bit of power. He's going to get you some doubles. He can run the bases. He's a damn good all-around player, Javier Baez, and that's not a lot of money considering, because he's going to start with $20 million between the next 2 years, and then it's going to go to 25 and then to 30, and then it's ultimately going to stop at 33 and then be done. By the time he's like 35 years old, the contract will be over if he stays all 6 years. So right now, between the 29 mark to 35, that's not so bad. When you're thinking about Carlos Correa, yes, I know he's a little bit step above Baez, but you're asking north of 10 years and $300 million. He already was offered 10 and 270 from the Tigers, and he turned that down. He wants something closer to what Corey Seager from 10 and 325. You'd be thinking he wants 350 plus. Now, if the Tigers were one player away, Carlos Correa might make sense. Granted, look, I understand the relationship between him, the Houston Astros, and AJ Hinch at the time, but the Tigers are not one player away. They're getting out of the dark ages right now. I would rather the Tigers do not handcuff themselves when someone like Correa when they're still a few players away, because look at it like this, what the Tigers have already did in the offseason, and I documented with Eduardo Rodriguez. Yes, some of you might think that his numbers are a little high, but I think coming from that division between the Blue Jays, like we said, with Bichette, Simeon, Vlad Guerrero Jr., and all of that, those numbers will come down. You're not playing against the New York Yankees, the Baltimore Orioles, and the Boston Red Sox. You're coming into a division in the AL Central where your only main opponent would be the Chicago White Sox, barring any kind of miracles or turnaround from the Minnesota Twins. So I already think that that's a solid signing. And it's already been well documented over the years that the Tigers needed to improve that bullpen as well. So you can use all of that money left to be able to do something like that, especially when everything else resumes with the talks and these players and these other deals can get done. And like we've talked about, hopefully coming into this 2022 season, you have Spencer Torkelson locked in at first base, and you have Riley Green in the outfield that's already going to be helping with Akil Baddoo, Derek Hill, and Robbie Grossman. So this team is going to get a lot better. And quite frankly, with Javier Baez, I think that they've made the smart move in terms of all the things that they want to do, and that's where they needed to start. So no, they didn't land Carlos Correa, but I don't think this is a death sentence for this team. I think they're still on the right path. I think this is ultimately the right move that they should have made. And I think the most important thing going into the 2023 season, after this improvement is done, and hopefully the Tigers can make a push in 2022 toward the playoffs. Although that being said, considering the season that they had last year, they could be due for a little bit of a downturn because I thought it was a little bit of an overachievement. But be that as it may, after this 2022 season ends, the most important person on this Tigers roster is not a player. It's the manager, AJ Hinch. They got to find a way to back down the Brinks truck and get this guy signed, because you're not getting a better manager than him if he walks away and goes to another high-profile team. Because look, he can say, you went through the cheating scandal, I've done my sentence in Detroit, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to win some World Series. Or right now, if you're the Tigers, you can go not seemingly all in, but to the point where you get some good players to build that foundation. So going forward, like the Astros did, going forward when they drafted Carlos Correa, Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, when they had Juan Gonzalez, when they had JD Martinez, and they had all these other guys knowing that they're going to be winning. That's what the Tigers could ultimately be doing. But they're going to be a much better team if they can retain A.J. Hinch after the 2022 season. And they need to really go all out at that point. That's what you need to go all out for, is to keep your manager here in Detroit. And that's what I ultimately believe. But what are your thoughts? Facebook.com/GBU Gunslinger, Twitter @JohnReinott. Did the Tigers ultimately make the right decision with Javier Baez, or still, after all the information that I presented to you, do you believe they should have went after Carlos Correa? That's all for today. Thank you for listening to the show, and hopefully we'll get some more stuff going on soon. And like I mentioned, as I'm moving stuff from this new podcast part, I want to make a mention that I get the name right here from Spotify. Hold on one second here. So this is for Anchor Podcast here for Spotify. If all this stuff doesn't move over for me for Shout Engine, or they'll delete some of that stuff, because of the data caps, I'm going to try to download the rest of my previous content and play-by-play at the end of December. And if it doesn't cut over and I can't get everything like posted on Spotify and all that too, I'm just going to re-download all the stuff and put it all in myself manually. But right now I wanted to get a couple episodes of content to put there that's new, to see how everything else is going. As far as the TV front and all of that, I was very, very, very tempted to get the LG C1 OLED now. As I'm told, and the price I was able to get it locked in for, I could even get a better price if I wait until the Super Bowl in February. So I'm going to probably wait, because considering, like I said, with the PS5 that I don't have a Series X, I don't have a Switch, but with all of that, you still don't unlock the ultimate power of the 4K 120 and all of that on these games, not even close yet. So I could consider to wait for the C1 if it gets to a better price toward the price range I want, or, begrudgingly hold on for another 4 years until the next console or a Pro iteration on the 5. I know that's going to be really painful, because this is already a 13-plus-year-old TV that I think is going to die soon. But again, we'll talk about that on a later date. As always, I appreciate it, you guys. Talk to you soon.